Michael and Sarah Thompson had spent 7 years saving for their dream home, pinching pennies and working overtime while living in a cramped apartment that felt smaller with each passing year. Every Sunday, they would drive through neighborhoods they admired, imagining what it would be like to finally have a place of their own. When the modest single-story house in Oakwood Estates came on the market, they knew immediately it was the one. "Look at that backyard," Sarah had whispered during the showing, squeezing Michael's hand as they stood on the back porch. The previous owners had maintained a simple lawn with a few flower beds, but the space stretched wide and inviting, perfect for what the Thompsons had always dreamed of. "Plenty of room for that pool," Michael replied, already picturing it. An elegant kidney-shaped oasis where they could relax after long workdays, host weekend barbecues, and perhaps someday teach their children to swim. The closing process had been nerve-wracking. Their offer was accepted over 3 others, but the inspection revealed plumbing issues that nearly tanked the deal. They negotiated repairs, watched their savings dwindle with unexpected fees, and signed what felt like hundreds of documents. When the keys were finally handed over on a crisp February morning, both had tears in their eyes. "We did it," Sarah said, standing in their empty living room, voice echoing slightly against the bare walls. "It's really ours." They spent the first month painting rooms, replacing outdated light fixtures, and planning the backyard transformation. Michael researched pool contractors meticulously, comparing quotes and portfolios, while Sarah created elaborate Pinterest boards showcasing design ideas. "We have to do this right," Michael said one evening as they reviewed their finances. "This isn't just a pool, it's the reason we chose this house." They selected Riverside Pools, a company with excellent reviews and 20 years of experience in the area. The owner, Jim Keller, walked them through every step of the process, from design options to material choices. Together, they settled on a design that balanced aesthetics with practicality. A medium-sized pool with a small waterfall feature, surrounded by natural stone decking that would complement the home's exterior. "Don't worry about permits," Jim assured them. "We handle all the paperwork with the city. Been doing this long enough to know exactly what they need." True to his word, within 3 weeks, all necessary city approvals had been secured. The permits were prominently displayed in the Thompsons' front window as required by local ordinance. On a Monday in early April, the excavation crew arrived, marking the official beginning of construction. That evening, Michael and Sarah stood at their kitchen window, watching the large hole that now dominated their backyard, arms wrapped around each other. 6 more weeks, Sarah said, excitement evident in her voice. "Just 6 more weeks, and we'll be swimming in our very own pool." Michael nodded, imagining warm summer evenings floating under the stars, weekend gatherings with friends they'd never had space to host before, and the simple luxury of stepping into cool water on hot days. After years of dreaming and months of planning, their vision was finally taking physical form. Neither of them noticed the woman watching from down the street, clipboard in hand, mouth set in a disapproving line as she made notes and took photos of the construction site. Veronica Chambers had been president of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association for 6 consecutive years. No one ran against her anymore. Her campaign strategy was simple: identify the 3 most vocal critics in the neighborhood and systematically find violations at their properties until they either fell in line or moved away. She lived in a meticulously maintained 2-story colonial 3 houses down from the Thompsons, with a yard so precisely manicured it looked more like a museum exhibit than a living space. "Standards," Veronica often announced at HOA meetings, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been successfully challenged, "are what separate us from the chaos of unregulated neighborhoods. Standards are why our property values continue to rise while others fall." Her personal life was something of a neighborhood mystery. Divorced 12 years ago, she lived alone except for a small, nervous Pomeranian named Regent who barked at anything that moved. Her ex-husband had reportedly fled to Arizona and remarried within months. Neighbors whispered he seemed 10 years younger at the wedding photos he posted online. Veronica's daily routine included a morning standards walk where she circled the neighborhood with a leather-bound notebook documenting violations. Grass half an inch too tall. Holiday decorations left up one day past the permitted period. Garbage cans visible from the street. She maintained detailed files on every property in a home office that took up what should have been a dining room, walls lined with 3-ring binders organized by address. When she first noticed the excavation equipment at the Thompson property, Veronica had been irritated but not concerned. Most new homeowners tried something unauthorized, providing her the opportunity to establish dominance early in their residency. She checked city records online and found the permits were indeed in order. But her irritation grew as she searched for files and confirmed what she suspected: no HOA application had been submitted. "Amateurs," she muttered, adding a red flag to the Thompson folder she created upon their purchase. Beside it sat a thick binder labeled Pool Regulations, which she personally expanded from 3 pages to 27 during her tenure, adding restrictions on everything from permitted water depths to approved shades of blue for pool liners. That evening, she called an emergency consult with Gerald Foster, the HOA treasurer and her most reliable ally. Gerald was a retired accountant who found personal fulfillment in denying expenditure requests and increasing violation fines. The Thompsons in 427 are installing a pool without HOA approval, she told him over speakerphone while updating her violation log. Construction is already underway. Gerald replied, the sound of shuffling papers coming through the line. Pool installation without prior written consent is a Category 3 violation. That's a $100 initial fine, increasing by $25 daily until remediation. I'm aware of the fine schedule, Gerald. I wrote it. Veronica's tone was clipped. The question is whether we make an example of them now or let them sink more money into the project before we intervene. There was a pause before Gerald chuckled. Well, the deeper the hole. Exactly. Veronica smiled thinly, closing the file with a decisive snap. Let's let them dig a bit further. I'll pay them a visit later this week. Best to give new residents the full Oakwood Estates welcome experience. What neither Veronica nor Gerald knew was that among the hundreds of documents the Thompsons had signed during closing was one that would eventually unravel Veronica's carefully constructed kingdom, a property boundary amendment that had never been properly recorded in the HOA database. Michael stood at the edge of the excavation, sipping a beer as the setting sun cast long shadows across what would soon be their pool. The workers had left for the day, but he liked to come out each evening to mark the progress. Today they'd finished the basic shape, the kidney curve exactly as he and Sarah had envisioned, and tomorrow they would begin installing the plumbing. Quite a project you got going here, came a voice from behind him. Michael turned to find a woman standing on the other side of his fence. Her salt and pepper hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she wore a beige pantsuit despite the warm evening. A small dog strained at its leash, yapping incessantly at Michael. I'm Veronica Chambers, Oakwood Estates HOA president, she said, not bothering to quiet the dog. She extended a business card between two manicured fingers, reaching over the fence. I don't believe we formally met. Michael Thompson. He took the card reflexively, noting it featured a small neighborhood logo and listed 3 different contact numbers. My wife and I moved in about 2 months ago. Veronica nodded, her gaze fixed on the excavation. And already making significant changes, I see. There was something in her tone that made Michael straighten. We've got all the permits. They're displayed in the front window as required. City permits, yes, I checked. Veronica smiled, a tight movement that didn't reach her eyes. Unfortunately, that pool wasn't approved by the HOA committee. Michael blinked. I'm sorry. All exterior modifications require HOA approval before construction begins. It's clearly stated in the covenant, page 17, paragraph 4. She spoke as if reciting a well-rehearsed speech. You'll need to halt construction immediately and submit proper paperwork. But we have all necessary city permits, Michael repeated, a knot forming in his stomach. Our contractor handled everything. City permits and HOA approval are separate matters, Veronica replied, her voice taking on a lecturing tone. The city concerns itself with safety and zoning. The HOA ensures aesthetic consistency and property value protection. You really should have read your welcome packet more carefully. Michael vaguely remembered a thick binder they'd received at closing, still sitting unopened on a shelf. Sarah had promised to get to it once we're settled. So what happens now, he asked, already calculating how much money they'd lose if construction stopped. You'll need to submit an application for review. Veronica reached into a leather portfolio he hadn't noticed before and extracted a multi-page form. The committee considers all applications at our monthly meetings. The next one is on the 27th. That's more than 3 weeks away, Michael protested. We can't just leave a huge hole in our backyard for almost a month. Veronica's expression didn't change. You should have thought of that before beginning unauthorized construction. However, I'm willing to be reasonable. You have 48 hours to submit your paperwork, including detailed plans, material specifications, and a signed acknowledgement of potential fines. If it's complete, I might be able to call an emergency review. She slid the papers through the fence posts. As Michael took them, she added with a thin smile, Do understand that continued construction without approval would constitute a willful violation. Those carry significant penalties, Mr. Thompson. As she turned to leave, her dog gave one final yap. Welcome to Oakwood Estates, Veronica called over her shoulder. We pride ourselves on being a community that follows the rules. Michael watched her retreat down the sidewalk, the stack of forms heavy in his hands. He pulled out his phone to call Sarah, knowing their perfect evening had just been shattered. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of stress and paperwork. Michael called in sick to work, and Sarah canceled 3 client meetings as they scrambled to complete the HOA application. They contacted their pool contractor, who was bewildered by the situation. "I've done dozens of pools in Oakwood Estates," Jim insisted over the phone. "Never had an issue before. Something's not right here." Nevertheless, he provided detailed blueprints, material specifications, and even color swatches for the pool liner and surrounding stonework. The Thompsons stayed up until 2 a.m. completing the 20-page application, which required everything from water filtration details to a signed agreement that they would never use inflatable pool toys visible from the street. Sarah hand-delivered the completed application to Veronica's house the next morning. The HOA president answered the door in a tennis outfit, Regent barking frantically around her ankles. "I've marked it urgent," Veronica said, barely glancing at the paperwork. "But the committee members are all volunteers with busy lives. I can't promise anything." With no choice but to wait, the Thompsons instructed Jim to pause construction. He reluctantly agreed, though he warned that leaving the excavation exposed to the elements could cause problems with soil stability. They covered the site with tarps as best they could and crossed their fingers for quick approval. 3 days later, they received a letter stating their application was under review, with 6 items requiring clarification. Another 2 days passed addressing these concerns, which included questions about the exact decidable level of the pool pump and whether the water would reflect excessive sunlight into neighboring yards. "This is ridiculous," Sarah fumed, typing yet another email response. "They're deliberately dragging this out." By the end of the week, they'd spent over $800 on rush delivery fees for material samples and expert assessments Veronica suddenly deemed essential for the review process. Jim warned that his crew couldn't remain idle much longer. He'd have to reassign them to other projects. 10 days into the ordeal, both Michael and Sarah had to attend all-day conferences for work. They left early, commiserating about the mounting costs and delays. By mid-afternoon, Sarah's phone began buzzing with text messages from their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Abernathy. "Strange trucks in your backyard," read the first message. "Men pouring something." Sarah immediately called Michael, who was in the middle of a presentation. They both rushed home, breaking speed limits and running red lights. As they screeched into their driveway, they saw exactly what Mrs. Abernathy had described: 3 concrete trucks parked on the street, workers in coveralls directing massive hoses into their backyard, and the unmistakable sound of pouring concrete. They raced through the house and burst onto the back patio, where Veronica stood watching the work with clipboard in hand. 2 other HOA board members flanked her like lieutenants. The pool excavation, their dream, was now half filled with wet gray concrete. "Stop," Michael shouted to the workers, who looked up in confusion. Veronica stepped forward, a document extended in her hand. The deadline for complying with remediation notices expired at noon today. The HOA board held an emergency session and voted for immediate correction of the unauthorized construction. Her voice carried no emotion, as if she were reading a weather report. "This property must be returned to its original condition. We submitted everything you've asked for," Sarah cried, watching in horror as another load of concrete slurped into what should have been the deep end of their pool. "Your application was denied," Veronica replied simply. "Notification was sent this morning. Perhaps you should check your email more regularly." The concrete dried as quickly as the Thompsons' tears. For 3 days, they alternated between rage and despair, staring at the gray monstrosity in their backyard that had swallowed $15,000 of their savings and countless dreams. "We should sue," Michael said on the 3rd morning, pushing away his untouched coffee. "With what money?" Sarah countered. "We drained our savings on a pool we don't have." Her voice cracked. "Maybe we should just sell and move." They called the police first, who sent a sympathetic but unhelpful officer. "It's a civil matter," he explained, writing down their story but offering little hope. "HOAs have broad legal authority. You agreed to their rules when you bought the property." Desperate for any recourse, they searched online for attorneys specializing in HOA disputes. Most websites warned of lengthy, expensive battles with uncertain outcomes. Finally, they found Eleanor Wells, whose website featured testimonials from homeowners who had successfully challenged HOA actions. "I can see you Friday," Eleanor said when they called, something in their voices convincing her to squeeze them in. Her office was modest, walls lined with law books and framed newspaper clippings about various victories against corporations and governing bodies. Eleanor listened intently, taking notes as they explained the situation. When they finished, she asked to see their closing documents, deed, and any communication with the HOA. "Bring everything," she said. "Even paperwork you think is irrelevant. The devil's often in the details with these cases." They returned the next day with 2 boxes of documents. Eleanor set her paralegal Marcus to work organizing everything while she reviewed the deed with the Thompsons. "Wait," she said, pausing on a property description page. "This boundary marker reference doesn't match what I know about Oakwood Estates." She pulled up county records on her computer, comparing maps and muttering to herself. 4 hours into the review, Marcus burst into the conference room, waving the document. "Found something," he announced. 5 years ago, the city redrew the subdivision boundaries after purchasing land for a water retention project. 38 properties, including yours, were officially removed from the HOA jurisdiction. Eleanor grabbed the paper, scanning it rapidly. "This is it," she said, eyes widening. "Your property isn't legally part of the HOA. Hasn't been for 5 years. But we've been paying HOA dues," Sarah protested. "They sent us bills." "Which you paid, thinking you were obligated to," Eleanor nodded. "It's a common tactic with power-hungry HOAs. They continue billing properties they've lost authority over, hoping no one notices." As they digested this revelation, Marcus brought in another discovery, a copy of the work order for the concrete pouring. "No city permits," he explained. "Pouring concrete requires environmental runoff approval and safety inspections. They bypassed all of it." "So they acted without authority and without permits?" Michael asked. "Exactly," Eleanor replied. "And there's more. This work order is from Chambers Concrete Solutions." "Chambers," Sarah repeated. "Like Veronica Chambers?" Eleanor nodded grimly. "I had Marcus check corporate registrations. Chambers Concrete is owned by Victor Chambers, who shares Veronica's address. Her husband? Ex-husband." "Ex," Michael confirmed, remembering neighborhood gossip. "But he moved to Arizona years ago." "On paper, perhaps," Eleanor said. "But his company is still very active locally, and apparently doing very lucrative work for the HOA." She closed her notebook with a decisive snap. The HOA president authorized emergency remediation work to be performed by her ex-husband's company on property not under HOA jurisdiction, without proper permits. That's not just an HOA overreach, that's potential fraud. "We need more than just documents," Eleanor explained during their next meeting. "We need to establish a pattern of behavior and prove damages beyond just the concrete." The Thompsons nodded, determination having replaced their initial despair. Over the next 3 weeks, they constructed their case meticulously, piece by damning piece. Their first task was securing official confirmation of their property's status. Eleanor filed requests with the county assessor's office, obtaining certified copies of the boundary redrawing documents. The records clearly showed that the Thompsons' lot, along with 37 others, had been removed from HOA jurisdiction during the water retention project. "Look at this," Marcus said one afternoon, pointing to a highlighted section. "The HOA received a $250,000 settlement from the city for the lost territory." They knew of exactly which properties they no longer controlled. Next came the permit violations. Michael met with the city building inspector, who was visibly alarmed by photos of the concrete pour. "This is a serious code violation," the inspector confirmed, writing up an official report. "No drainage assessment, no safety inspection, no environmental impact review. I'm issuing a stop work order and violation notice immediately, though it's obviously too late." While Michael handled the city angle, Sarah turned detective. She set up a simple doorbell camera that captured Veronica conducting her daily standards walk, documenting every time she passed their house or took photos of their property. More crucially, Sarah began quietly connecting with neighbors. She started with Mrs. Abernathy, whose text had alerted them to the concrete disaster, then expanded outward coffee gate by coffee gate. "It was the bird bath for us," confided the Millers from 2 streets over. "Veronica claimed it was an unauthorized water feature and had it removed while we were on vacation." "Our vegetable garden," the Chens added when Sarah spoke with them. She said food-producing plants were agricultural use and prohibited. "We got a $500 fine." Pattern after pattern emerged. Homeowners who challenged Veronica found themselves targeted with escalating violations. Those who hired contractors other than Chambers Concrete for HOA-mandated repairs mysteriously failed multiple inspections until they switched. Most significantly, Sarah discovered 7 other homeowners who, like them, weren't legally under HOA jurisdiction, but were still paying dues and following HOA rules out of ignorance or fear. Meanwhile, Eleanor and Marcus followed the money. They submitted public records requests for HOA financial statements and board meeting minutes. The documents revealed that over the past 4 years, Chambers Concrete had received over $380,000 for emergency remediation projects, far above market rates for similar work. And look at the timing, Eleanor pointed out. Almost every major contract was awarded immediately after the quarterly payments from the properties that shouldn't even be paying HOA dues. Their most damning evidence came from Jim, their original pool contractor. He provided security camera footage from his equipment left at the site. Footage that clearly showed Veronica arriving before the concrete trucks, directing workers where to pour, and taking photos throughout the process. "She looks pleased," Michael observed grimly, watching Veronica smile as the first concrete splashed into their excavated pool. "She does," Eleanor agreed, "and that's exactly the impression we want the judge to have." By the time they filed their lawsuit, their evidence filled 3 thick binders. property records proving they weren't subject to HOA rules, security footage of the concrete pouring, documentation of permit violations, financial records showing the conflict of interest with Chambers Concrete, and testimonies from 17 neighbors who'd experienced similar harassment from Veronica. "Are we ready?" Sarah asked on the eve of their first court date. "More than ready," Eleanor replied confidently. "We're not just seeking damages anymore. We're building a case that could dismantle Veronica's entire operation."